This lesson introduces Server Core and a new concept of configuration levels in Windows Server 2012. For those familiar with Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2, you may have already used the Server Core installation option. If I open up a Windows Server 2008 R2 installation, you'll notice I have a number of options. I have an option for a full installation and also a Server Core installation for each of the various SKUs, so Standard, Enterprise, Datacenter, and Web Server. What this does is essentially install a subset of the Windows operating system onto the server. As each version of Windows Server has evolved, more and more features are added. This gives you more functionality in box and more value. However, it also increases the disk footprint, the number of components, and therefore the amount of patching and potentially reboots required for that server. The decision was therefore made in Windows Server 2008 to introduce this new Server Core installation option, which is the same operating system. It's the same underlying security system, application capabilities, event logs, performance counters, but it removes the higher level aspects of the graphical interface. So a Server Core installation does not have Explorer.exe as the shell. It doesn't have Internet Explorer. It doesn't even have the management tools like Server Manager and MMC. What I have here is a Windows Server 2012 Server Core, and this is what you see when you log on to the server. It's a command prompt. Now from here, I obviously cannot run things like Explorer. There is no graphical shell. There is no Internet Explorer. I do have familiar features such as the Task Manager. I also have the Registry Editor, and a number of control panel applets such as the Date Time Control Panel applet and the International Control Panel applet. I don't have any of the other control panel applets. For example, I don't have the System Control Panel applet. I don't have access to the management tools such as MMC or Server Manager. This means when I'm performing my configuration of a server core, I'm either doing it using familiar command prompt commands like netsh, dism, or I'm managing the box remotely. Now I do have access to MSInfo32 to gather basic information about the installation, but there is also a special text-based menu just for server core. So if I run sconfig.cmd, it gives me a menu that allows me to perform some basic initial configurations of the server. I can set its name, I can set the domain membership, add local administrators, enable remote management, which is actually enabled by default on Windows Server 2012 for both server core and a server with a GUI installation. I can manage Windows Update and also various network settings. The goal of this Server Core installation mode for Windows Server 2008 and Windows 2008 R2 was as an infrastructure server. This means it's designed to be used for the in-box infrastructure roles. It could be a domain controller, it could be a DNS server, it could be an IIS server, Hyper-V server. But it was not designed to be an application server, i.e. run services such as SQL Server or Exchange. Its focus was giving you a low overhead server installation for use with the inbox infrastructure roles. This minimizes the amount of patching and maintenance you have to perform on that server. Now in Windows Server 2008, you actually could not use PowerShell, nor could you use Server Manager, which I'm going to talk about in future lessons, to manage this box. You would have to use command prompt only, and you would have to use individual tools like Event Viewer, Computer Manager. In Server 2008 R2, the ability to use PowerShell was introduced, so I can actually launch PowerShell and then use my familiar PowerShell type commands on a server core installation. I can also use Server Manager, as in 2008 R2 it now supports remote management of server machines. Almost every inbox infrastructure role can now run on Server Core in Windows Server 2012. The exclusion is Active Directory Federated Services, the Application Server, Network Policy and Access Services, and Windows Deployment Services. Additionally, if you were going to use this box as a remote desktop session host for users, you would obviously want a graphical interface, as users are not familiar with logging on and using a command prompt. But for really any other purpose, you should use Server Core. The big shift in Windows Server 2012, Server Core is now the default installation option. If you accept all of the defaults through an installation, you will end up with a Server Core install. The other big shift is Server Core is now more than just an infrastructure platform. It's designed as an application platform as well. New applications will actually be supported on Server Core. For example, SQL Server 2012 now runs on the Server Core platform. One of the major differences in Server Core in Windows Server 2012 and Windows Server 2008 R2 and 2008 is that the option to say Server Core or a full installation had to be set at installation time. In Windows Server 2012, you can actually change the configuration level, as it's now known, at any point in the server's lifecycle. So the server could be installed as Server Core and the graphical shell added at a later time. To represent this shift in Server Core is now considered the default and the preferred option. You'll notice, as you can see here, during an installation of Windows Server 2012, you have the Server Core install option, and the full install is no longer called a full install. It is called Server with a GUI, to really represent the fact that Server Core is not considered a lower installation. It's still a full installation of Windows Server 2012 with all of the capabilities. It just doesn't have a local graphical shell. It doesn't by default have local management tools, but you should consider Server Core wherever possible. This concludes the lesson on the Server Core introduction, and we're going to continue this with more information on configuration levels and actually moving between these various configuration levels.